Hannah knew that keeping the small, carved wooden bird in her apron pocket was a deception, perhaps even a sin. Her fingers traced the smooth wings as she sat in the back of the buggy, the rhythmic clop-clop of the horse's hooves echoing against the silence of the morning. He had given it to her silently. Right before the church service began Caleb Yoder, the boy who had left for the English world and come back broken. Her father, the bishop, had warned her to look away from him. But how could she look away when his eyes held a sorrow that only she seemed to understand? Title: The Bishop's Daughter and the Prodigal Son. Setting: Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Characters: Hannah Stoltzfus 20, Caleb Yoder 22. Bishop Amos Stoltzfus 50 segundos. The morning mist still clung to the low valleys of Lancaster County, wrapping the farmhouse in a blanket of soft, pale gray. It was that hush, before the world truly woke up. A silence so profound you could hear the dew dripping from the eaves of the porch. Inside the Stoltzfus kitchen, the air was already warm and thick, with a scent of yeast and wood smoke. Hannah Stoltzfus moved with a practiced, quiet grace, her bare feet silent on the worn linoleum floor. She loved this time of day best. Before the heavy work began, before the sun rose high and hot, there was just the rhythmic kneading of dough and the soft hiss of the kerosene lamp burning on the table. She was 20 years old now, with eyes the color of the Susquehanna River after a rain and a spirit that, while obedient, often found itself wondering about the spaces between the rules. Her hands, strong from years of milking and gardening, folded the dough over, pushing it down, turning it, a rhythm she had learned before she could even read. Hard work keeps the heart steady. Her mungum always said, but today Hannah's heart was not steady. It fluttered like a bird trapped in a hayloft. Today was market day, but it was also the first Sunday since the rumors had started. The rumors that Caleb Yoder was back. Caleb, the name alone brought a flush to her cheeks that she hoped the dim light concealed. He had been the boy who chased her through the cornrows when they were children, the one who had carved her a whistle out of a willow branch. But 3 years ago, during his Rumspringa, he had left. He hadn't just gone to the movies or bought a car like some of the other boys. He had left Pennsylvania entirely. Some said he went to Ohio. Others said he went as far as the ocean. Her father, Bishop Amish, had shaken his head gravely when Caleb's name was mentioned, calling him a lost sheep who had tasted the world and found it too sweet to leave. But now the whisper was that the world hadn't been sweet at all. They said he had come back limping, with a scar on his face and empty pockets. Hannah finished covering the dough with a heavy cloth and moved to the window. The sun was cresting the hill now, painting the sky in strokes of apricot and violet. Out in the barn, she could hear the deep, booming voice of her father talking to the horses. Bishop Amish was a good man, a pillar of the community, but he was as unyielding as an oak tree in winter. He believed in the Ordnung rules that kept their life separate and holy more than he believed in almost anything else. Hannah dressed quickly, pinning her hair back severely under her prayer covering, smoothing down her dark dress. She had to be perfect today. If she was perfect, maybe her father wouldn't notice the way her eyes would search the congregation for him. The buggy ride to the Yoder's farm, where church was being held that Sunday, was quiet. The rhythmic clip-clop of their mare, Bessie, on the asphalt road was a hypnotic sound. Cars whizzed past them, the English in their rush to get nowhere fast. But inside the buggy, time moved at the pace of the 19th century. When they arrived, the yard was already full of gray buggies, parked in neat rows like soldiers. The men stood in a cluster near the barn, their black hats creating a sea of sameness, while the women bustled toward the house. And then she saw him. He was standing slightly apart from the other young men, leaning heavily against the fence. Caleb looked different. He was thinner, his face more angular, and there was indeed a thin, pale scar running along his jawline. He wasn't wearing his Sunday best. His coat looked a little too big, perhaps borrowed. Hannah's breath hitched. He looked up at that exact moment, across the crowded yard, past the horses and the other families. His eyes locked onto hers. They weren't the mischievous eyes of the boy, she remembered. They were tired, guarded, and filled with a longing that hit her like a physical weight. She quickly looked down, clutching her Bible, her heart hammering against her ribs. She followed her mother into the house, but the image of him standing alone, leaning on the fence, burned in her mind. He was back. But in a community that valued unity above all else, being back was not the same as being home. The weeks that followed Caleb's return were filled with a tension that seemed to hang over the valley like a summer storm. He had confessed his sins to the church. He had knelt and asked for forgiveness. But trust is a slow crop to grow. The older men watched him closely. They noticed his limp. They noticed that he didn't laugh as much as he used to. For Hannah, seeing him became the center of her week. They didn't speak in married men, and women didn't simply chat idly, especially not the bishop's daughter and a boy on probation, but they found ways. The Amish life is one of community labor, and labor brings people together. It was at a frolic, a work gathering to husk corn for the Miller family, that they first spoke. The barn was filled with laughter and the rustling of dry husks. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting long, dancing shadows. Hannah was working near the back, stripping the golden ears of corn and tossing them into a basket. "You missed a strand of silk," a voice said softly. She jumped slightly and looked up. Caleb was standing there, holding a basket. He wasn't looking at her face, but at her hands. He reached out and gently pulled a silky thread from the corn cob she was holding. His fingers brushed hers just for a second, but the heat of it traveled all the way up her arm. "It's good to see you, Hannah," he whispered, his voice rougher than she remembered. "And you, Caleb," she breathed, terrified that her father might see. We prayed for you." "I know," he said, a shadow crossing his face. "I could feel it, even when I was far away. It was the only thing that brought me back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a piece of wood, no bigger than a walnut. He pressed it into her hand, his fingers closing over hers for a brief, forbidden moment. "Hide it," he said. "Please." Before she could answer, he turned and walked away, his limp noticeable as he carried the heavy basket toward the crib. Hannah's heart was racing. She slipped the object into her apron pocket, her fingers trembling. Later, in the safety of her room, by the light of the moon coming through the window, she examined it. It was a carving of a tiny songbird, wings spread as if in mid-flight. The detail was exquisite. He had carved every feather. It must have taken him hours. It was a gift, a token, and in their world, where material possessions were few and courtship was strict, it was a declaration. He hadn't just come back for the faith, he had come back for her. Over the next month, these stolen moments became their lifeline. A glance across the market stall while she was selling quilts, a few words exchanged while he was helping her father repair a fence line. She learned that he had been working on a construction crew in the city, that he had fallen from a scaffold, shattering his leg. He told her how the English doctors had fixed him up, but how lonely the hospital room had been. He told her how he realized that the noise and the money out there meant nothing if you didn't have people who knew your name, who knew your soul. "I thought I wanted freedom, Hannah," he told her one afternoon by the creek, hidden by the high reeds. "But freedom without roots is just being lost." "Dad says you're still worldly," Hannah said softly, looking at the water. "He says you're restless." "Your father sees the limp," Caleb said, looking at her with intensity. "He doesn't see the heart. My heart is here, with the land. With you." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. But she was the bishop's daughter. Her behavior had to be beyond reproach. If she was caught meeting him like this, it wouldn't just be a scolding. It would be a scandal that could cost her father his standing and Caleb his chance at redemption. The crisis came, as they often do, on a day that started perfectly ordinary. It was late October, and the harvest was nearly done. The air was crisp, smelling of dried leaves and wood smoke. Hannah had been careless. She had left her apron on the chair in the kitchen, the apron with the deep pocket where she kept the wooden bird. She had meant to move it to her cedar chest, but her mother had called her to help with the canning, and she had forgotten. When she returned to the kitchen an hour later, the apron was gone. Her stomach dropped. She walked into the front room, and there sat her father. He was sitting in his rocking chair, the heavy family Bible open on his lap. But he wasn't reading. On the small table beside him sat the wooden bird. The silence in the room was deafening. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, tick, tock, marking the seconds of her doom. Bishop Amos didn't look up immediately. He picked up the carving with his large, calloused hand, turning it over. "It is well made," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The hand that made this Haskell. Da-ed, ... Hannah started, her voice shaking. He looked up then, and his eyes were full of a deep, weary sadness. "Caleb Yoder." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she whispered. "Has he courted you? Have you been meeting him alone?" Hannah couldn't lie. "Not to him. We have spoken briefly. At the frolic by the creek." Amos closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. He stood up, towering over her. "Hannah, you know the rules. You know the danger of being unevenly yoked. That boy, he has walked in the world of the English. He has tasted things we do not touch. He is not settled. He is settled, dead." Hannah cried out, a rare defiance rising in her. "He came back. He chose us. He chose God." "Did he?" Amos asked sharply. "Or did he come back because he was broken and had nowhere else to go? There is a difference. Hannah, a man who returns because he has failed is not the same as a man who returns because he believes." He picked up the bird and walked to the wood stove. "No," Hannah gasped, stepping forward. He opened the iron door of the stove. The orange glow of the embers illuminated his stern face. "This is a graven image, Hannah. It is a distraction, and it is a token of a deception." He tossed the beautiful, delicate carving into the fire. Hannah watched in horror as the dry wood caught instantly, the wings turning black, then crumbling into ash. It felt as if he had thrown her heart into the flames. "You will not speak to him again," the bishop commanded, dusting his hands. "If he comes to this farm, I will turn him away. If I see you looking at him at church, we will have a talk with the deacons. Do you understand?" "Yes, dead," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "It is for your own good, child," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "A bird with a broken wing cannot fly, and it will only drag you down into the dirt with it." The winter that followed was the coldest Lancaster County had seen in a decade. Snow piled up against the fences, burying the world in white silence. For Hannah, the cold was inside as much as it was outside. She did her chores mechanically. She milked the cows. She sewed the quilts. She cooked the meals. But the light had gone out of her eyes. She saw Caleb at church every other Sunday. He looked miserable. He must have heard through the grapevine that the bishop had forbidden him from courting her. He stood in the back, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He didn't try to catch her eye anymore. He respected her father's authority, even if it was killing him. The separation was a physical ache. Hannah realized that she hadn't just fallen in love with a boy. She had fallen in love with the shared understanding they had. They were both people who felt things deeply in a culture that encouraged stoicism. Without him, she felt entirely alone. One evening, a blizzard struck with ferocious intensity. The wind howled around the farmhouse, rattling the window panes. The snow was falling so fast it was a white curtain, blinding and disorienting. Bishop Amos had gone out to the barn to check on a sick heifer. He had been gone a long time, too long. Miriam Hannah's mother paced the kitchen floor. "He should have been back," she murmured. "The wind is bad, Hannah. It's very bad." Hannah looked out the window. She couldn't see the barn, which was only 50 yards away. The whiteout was total. "I'll go check," Hannah said, grabbing her heavy wool shawl and lighting a lantern. "Be careful," her mother warned. Hannah stepped out onto the porch, and the wind nearly knocked her over. The cold was brutal, biting through her layers instantly. She fought her way toward the barn, the lantern casting a feeble yellow circle in the swirling snow. When she reached the barn door, she found it unlatched, banging violently against the frame. She pushed inside, calling out, "Dead." There was no answer. The animals were restless, shifting in their stalls. She ran down the center aisle. In the back, near the sick heifer's stall, she found him. Bishop Amish was lying on the straw, clutching his chest. His face was gray, his breathing shallow and ragged. "Deh." She dropped to her knees beside him. "My ... chest ... Quotes, he gasped. "Can ... breathe. It was a heart attack." Hannah knew it instantly. She needed help. She couldn't lift him alone, and she couldn't get the buggy ready by herself in this storm. But the nearest farm was the Yoders. Caleb's farm. It was a quarter-mile down the road. "I'm going for help," she yelled over the wind. "No ... Double quotes. Amish wheezed. "Storm ... 2 ... Dangerous. I have to." She didn't wait for his permission. She ran back out into the blizzard. The run to the Yoders was a nightmare. The snow was knee-deep now. She fell twice, losing her lantern the second time, plunging her into darkness. She navigated by memory and by the faint outline of the telephone poles. She reached the Yoder porch, pounding on the door with frozen fists. "Help! Please! It's dead!" The door flew open. Caleb stood there, framed by the warm light of the kitchen. He took one look at her snow-covered, terrified, shivering, and didn't ask a single question. He grabbed his coat and his hat. "Where is he?" Caleb asked, grabbing a flashlight. "The barn." "His heart," Hannah sobbed. Caleb turned to his father inside the house. "Call the English ambulance. Tell them to meet us at the end of the lane. The lane is too snowed in for them to get to the house. We'll have to bring him out." Caleb didn't limp then. He ran into the storm, holding Hannah's arm to keep her steady. When they got to the barn, Amish was barely conscious. "Bishop," Caleb said, his voice commanding but gentle, "we're going to get you out." Caleb, despite his bad leg, lifted the heavy older man. It was a struggle. Hannah saw Caleb grimace in pain as his weight shifted onto his injured leg, but he didn't falter. He gritted his teeth, sweat mingling with the melting snow on his forehead. "Lean on me, Bishop." "I've got you." Together, Hannah and Caleb half-carried, half-dragged the bishop through the blizzard to the end of the long lane. It took 20 agonizing minutes. Every step was a battle against the wind. Caleb took the brunt of the wind, shielding Hannah and her father with his own body. By the time they reached the main road, the flashing lights of the ambulance were cutting through the snow. The paramedics took over, loading Amish onto the stretcher. As the doors closed and the siren wailed, fading into the night, Caleb collapsed into a snowbank, clutching his bad leg. Hannah dropped beside him. "You saved him," she whispered, grabbing his hands. "Caleb, you saved him." He looked at her, his face pale with pain but his eyes burning with that same intensity. "I wouldn't let him go, Hannah. He's your father." Bishop Amish survived. The doctors said if he had arrived 10 minutes later, he wouldn't have made it. He spent a week in the hospital and then returned home to recover. The atmosphere in the Stoltzfus house had changed. It was quieter, more Ribeiro. Amish spent his days sitting in his chair by the window, watching the snow melt as spring approached. He didn't say much. He prayed often. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the storm, there was a knock at the door. It was Caleb. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking nervous. Hannah was in the kitchen. She froze. Her mother looked at her, then at the bishop. "Let him in," Amos said. His voice was weaker than before, but steady. Caleb entered. He didn't look at Hannah. He looked straight at the bishop. "I came to see how you were mending, Bishop Stoltzfus." "I am mending," Amos said. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." Caleb sat. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the angry silence of before. It was a thoughtful silence. "You carried me," Amos said. "Hannah told me. You carried me through the drifts on a leg that gives you pain." "It was what had to be done," Caleb said simply. "Why?" Amos asked. "I turned you away. I burned your work. I judged your heart." Caleb looked down at his hands, then up at the old man. "Because the Ordnung teaches us to love our neighbor, and because I respect you. You are a man of God, even if you didn't see me clearly. And ... double quotes." He glanced at Hannah, then back to Amos. "Because I love your daughter, and I would carry the world on my back if it meant keeping sorrow from her door." Amos looked at Caleb for a long, long time. He looked at the scar on the young man's face, the calluses on his hands, the humility in his posture. Finally, the bishop nodded, a slow, decisive nod. "I was wrong," Amos said. The words hung in the air. It was rare for a bishop to admit such a thing. "I saw the scar on your face and thought it was a mark of the world, but I see now it is just a mark of a life lived. You have a strong back, Caleb Yoder, and a faithful heart." Amos reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small pocket knife, his own knife, with a handle of polished bone. He held it out to Caleb. "If you're going to carve," Amos said, a twinkle appearing in his tired eyes, "you should use a good blade. And perhaps... ... perhaps you can carve another bird, one that doesn't burn." Hannah let out a sob she had been holding in 4 months. Caleb took the knife, his hand shaking slightly. "Thank you, Bishop," Caleb whispered. "You may speak to her," Amos said, waving his hand toward Hannah, "but keep the door open." Caleb stood up and turned to Hannah. He didn't touch her, not yet. Ehust smiled, and for the first time since he had returned to Lancaster, the shadow was gone from his eyes. He was home. 5 years have passed since that winter storm. The Stoltzfus farm is busy today. There is a new addition to the house, a doughty house for Bishop Amos and Miriam, who have retired from the heavy work. On the porch of the main house, a young woman sits in a rocking chair, nursing a baby. It is Hannah. She looks tired, but there is a deep, abiding contentment in her face. The morning sun catches the gold in her hair beneath her white prayer covering. Across the yard, a man is working on the barn door. He walks with a slight limp, but he moves with strength and purpose. It is Caleb. He stops hammering and wipes his brow, looking toward the porch. He waves his hammer, grinning. Hannah smiles back. She reaches into the pocket of her dress and pulls out a toy for the baby. It is a wooden horse, smooth and perfectly carved. She places it in the infant's small, chubby hands. To Bobby Coos, gripping the wood, Hannah looks out over the green fields of tobacco and corn, stretching all the way to the horizon. The life is simple. The work is hard, but the love is as deep and wide as the valley itself. She watches Caleb walk toward the house for lunch, and she knows, with a certainty that shakes her soul, that some things faith, family, and true love are worth every storm.